Sharif, thank you, and holy husband to Lady Gabrielle. Lady Gabrielle, thank you so much both. And let me just take a second to set the context of where we are. Like, what are we doing here? So this is not, let me say what it's not, and one of the great traditions we have in thought is we call it via negativa. Via negativa means, or neti means what is something not? What are we not doing? So this is not a classical spiritual gathering. It's not a church meeting. It's not a synagogue meeting. It's not a human transformation meeting. And all of those are exceedingly important and wonderful, human activities, but that's not exactly what we're doing. What we're doing is we're shifting our perspective to God's perspective. We're taking a God's eye view. And that shift of perspective is the fundamental move that we need to make today politically, but it's also, for example, the fundamental move in genuine mystical literature. So, for example, one writer named Shneur Zalman of La'adi writes a book called Tanya, and the essence of the book is to shift your perspective from your own narrow, myopic perspective. And narrow and myopic is simply because you're an individual human being living your life and you're engaging in all the ways you engage in your life. But to actually shift that perspective and take a divine perspective to move from mitzidenu to mitzido, from our side to his side, as it were, right? To look with a God's eye view, to be able to see the larger action. And in case Shneur Zalman of La'adi is a too esoteric of a source, and most awesome Dr. Kincaid, I'm going to ask you to turn your volume down if you can a little bit. Okay, that's awesome. Perfect. Thank you very, very much. That way I lose the echo. Thank you. So if Shneur Zalman of La'adi is too esoteric a source, let me see if I can take you back. And if you were too young for this, maybe you saw the reruns 20 years later. So how many people remember, and I saw the reruns, I have to say, I'm in the rerun category, but how many people remember seeing David Carradine in the, what was it, mid-70s, early 80s? When was it? Kung Fu. How many people remember that show, right? Okay, so what happens in Kung Fu? What do you know about the show? So the show actually takes the God's eye view. In other words, you see David Carradine, who's thought to be a murderer in the world. He's thought, right, he's wanted by the Chinese government for having ostensibly murdered someone. It was actually in defense of his teacher in a righteous context, but actually he's a wanted murderer in the public context. He doesn't have anyone doing his social media, so he's got no one to handle it. No one's handling his wiki page, right? So his context in the world is he's a wanted murderer. Big deal. And then he wanders into a town, right? He senses some injustice, remember, happening in the town, and he gets involved in the action. Now, if you remember the way the show happened from a cinematographer's perspective, the viewer of the show always knows everything that's going on. That's what they did brilliantly in the show. You know what he was thinking. You know what all the parties in town were thinking. So you were the viewer. But that's the God's eye view. And that's not the view of any one of the characters in the story. Carradine didn't have access to that view, nor did anyone else in the story have access to that view. The only person that had access to that view was the viewer. So the viewer is watching with a God's eye view, and they can actually see the action unfolding, who's pure, who's impure, whose motivations are clean, who is confused, who's ulterior, who's plotting against who. That's a God's eye view. That's what a God's eye view means. So to actually look at reality today with a God's eye view, right, is what we need to do, because the ordinary way of looking at reality, let's just think in terms of economics. Adam Smith, right, writes two major books, one on moral sentiments and the other on the wealth of nations. And in one of the books, he talks about the invisible hand of the market, right? And we think, okay, the invisible hand of the market is going to guide us. There's going to be this kind of natural economic structuring of the market. But of course, Adam Smith was talking about a local society in which there were normal classical laws of supply and demand at play, and there was power both on the supply side and the demand side. And in that structure of, towns and townships, there was a structure, an invisible hand of the market that might govern society. Right? That invisible hand of the market is gone today. Right? Every condition that Adam Smith thought existed to govern the marketplace is gone. Right? None of them are at play. And I'll just give you one simple example. So, how many people here have an iPhone? Anyone who's got an iPhone? Okay, great. Now, how many people have an iPhone 2? Nobody. iPhone 3? Nobody. iPhone 4? Nobody. iPhone 5? Nobody. iPhone 6? Nobody. Right? So you got my point. Right? Okay, Dottie's got our iPhone 6, okay? But basically, most people are up to an iPhone 10. Why? Is it because you needed an iPhone 10? How many people had a profound need for an iPhone 10? Nobody. So what generated the purchase of an iPhone 10? And it's fascinating. Not Adam Smith's invisible hand of the market. What generated the purpose was the supplier manufacturing demand. Does everyone get that? Demand all of a sudden is manufactured. It's manufactured by a supplier. The supplier actually controls the means of communication. That's shocking. The actual means of public communication are actually controlled by the supplier who's creating the product. It's just one very small example, but if you get the implications of that, you understand that supply and demand is not at play at all today. Actually, the markets are fundamentally dominated, and by the way, the stock market today, if you really understand what's happening, the easements in the stock market today, it's driven by a group of 6 or 7 companies, period. It's how 6 or 7 huge mega giga companies, complexes, but it's those 6 or 7 groups that drive the market. Everything else is irrelevant. And they're also driving demand because they're manufacturing demand through a network effect, which requires that everyone be part of the game. Because if you step out of the game, right, then you can't play. And they're all privatized, right? So all of these are controlled by, for example, on the tech side, they're controlled by about 14 people total. Whoa. Okay, that's just one little snapshot of our world. Now, we've talked about, in all 7 of our prior conversations. Jamie, is that good over there? It looks like it's really delicious. Okay, awesome. Okay, we've talked about in all 7 of our prior conversations, right? We've talked about the nature of existential risk. And part of existential risk comes from, right, this situation in which you've got concentrated power with a very, very narrow group of people. And those group of people, right, are driven by a complex combination of motives. One set of motives is radically utopian. So for example, Larry Page, Sergey Brin, right, if you read them carefully, since they started Google, they have very clear utopian motivations. Meaning they want to fix the world. The problem is that wanting to fix the world, right, a couple of people, right, that gets a little dangerous when you don't have first principles and first values that are going to guide the way you fix the world. So for example, stay with me everybody, in Jewish New York, about which much has been written in, let's say, the 1930s in America, how many of the Jewish leading intellectuals were the leading intellectuals of the United States? How many of them were capitalists? Almost none. Most of them were communists. Why were they communists? They were communists because communism made a claim, which was a utopian claim, and that utopian claim said we're going to fix the world. And there's a deep resonance within Hebrew mystical literature for tikkun olam, for fixing the world. So if you can side with the capitalists or the communists, who are you going to side with? The communists, of course. The only problem is that communism was an attempt to fix the world without first principles and first values, right? In other words, there were no first principles and first values to guide that movement of tikkun, of transformation, which is why communism killed more people more brutally than any other single force in human history. That's a big deal. That's a big deal, right? More than all the religious wars, more than Nazism, right? The utopian move merged with the power move is always devastating. And I'm just talking now about, this is just one glimpse into one dimension of catastrophic risk. The new utopians are not the Chinese Communist Party. The Chinese Communist Party doesn't care about Mao, although they've imposed a Mao-like, vice-like control on China, but they're actually driven explicitly today by power, right? And they believe that their control of the world will be better for the world, so their power mixes with a strange utopianism. But they're just one dimension. They're a small dimension. A much bigger dimension is what I want to call techno-feudalism itself, right? The entire techplex, right, is driven by a very small group of people, right, who are actually extracting value from our breadcrumbs on the web, feeding those breadcrumbs into machine intelligence. Machine intelligence develops a personality profile in each person. That personality profile then can influence the way people not only buy, the way they vote. And since, for example, Facebook, just as an example, and Google are split testing all day. Split testing meaning they're experimenting all day to actually create arbitrary, statistically regular peer groups that can actually influence your behavior. And let me ask you a question. If that's true, does democracy work? And just stay close with me, friends. So the truth is, if you really understand the techplex today, you understand that democracy is going very, very close to being an old bad joke. It's a big deal. 2011. Facebook did a test of 61 million Facebook users with a particular attempt to influence whether they would vote or not, right? And they succeeded in having a statistically highly significant impact on who voted, right, in the particular district they're trying to get people to vote. And they did it through a mixture. They didn't do it through written. It was interesting. Written prods to vote did very little. Showing people pictures of certain of their Facebook friends who had already voted statistically, right, ramped up the effectiveness. And Facebook demonstrated that by doing this split test, I'm going to ask you, Dawn, to mute yourself. I apologize, just so we can just press that little mute button. Awesome. Fantastic. You are rock.
Can you hear me?
We can. We love. That's okay. You're awesome. We love hearing you. It's fantastic. Okay, you're great. Okay, now we're missing you. Okay, so Facebook points out that they're able to statistically change by 2-3% how many people in a particular district are voting. But they're doing that without anyone knowing they're doing it. They just happen to release this one study. So what does that mean about democracy? I'm just giving you, these are just a couple of snapshots because I wanted to enter it through a different perspective this week. But just so you get a sense, the basic structures of how we think the world operates are not operating that way anymore. Democracy, right, as an institution, virtually is not going to work, right, within 10 years, right, because of the impact of the incredible and insidious level of control, right, that is, right, actuated by techno-feudalism through split testing, which is invisible to anyone who's watching the story. Wow, right, so there's a lot going on here. Now, I don't want to spend too much time, not more than 2 more minutes, right, kind of framing the threat. What I just talked about were kind of relatively minor catastrophic risks. As we've talked about more deeply, right, there's a much larger set of existential risks. But at the core of everything, and I want to bring it down to this sentence, the core of everything is an inability to articulate a universal grammar of value. We don't have a shared language. We don't have a shared story. Since we don't have a shared language and a shared story, we can't even get outraged. Right, so let's say we want to be outraged at Facebook split testing. Well, why should we be outraged? Well, because it's a bad thing to do. Why is it a bad thing to do? We only get outraged when we can actually show that a first principle and a first value has been violated. When there's a violation of value, then we activate political will, then we can generate change. If there's no violation of value, we can't activate political will, we can't generate astonishment and outrage, and we can't move to change. But if we live in a structure in which there's no shared language of value, right, other than in particular silos that are all polarized from each other, if there's no universal grammar of value, we have no chance of activating any kind of global consensus. And since every single one of our problems and issues and challenges and existential risks and catastrophic risks are global, if we can't create global coherence, through creating a global narrative of value, right, then we can't activate the political will to actually move in the directions we need to move. On issues like, for example, who owns the data? Big issue, right? As we're in this particular moment in history where power is moving from the voter to the algorithm, right? In other words, the new seat of power in reality, if you really understand what's going on, if you can kind of step out of our own myopic lives and the deals we're making and the things we're doing, which are beautiful and good, but if you really want to step out and look at what's really happening, the locus of authority is moving to the algorithm. Wow. And the algorithms are programmed for what? Efficiency, productivity, right? Stability. So the algorithms optimized for efficiency, productivity, stability, and profit. So the goal of the algorithm is, let's say in social media, let's say on the web, is to generate maximum engagement. But engagement is a euphemism, and a euphemism is a euphemism for another word. It's called a lie. All engagement means is we want to hijack your attention for as long as possible to keep you engaged in order to what? To extract more data on you, to then divert that data into machine intelligence, which then ups the level of our predictive analysis, which is what we sell to third parties who are misaligned with your value as a product. That's a big deal. That's what's actually happening. That's what an algorithm does. So for example, this is almost funny. For example, all across the world today, right, people are seeing pictures of their former wife or husband. They're seeing pictures of their former wife or husband having a good time with someone else. That's happening all over the place because the algorithm generates that, because the algorithm is always self-optimizing for a result. And what captures your attention more than anything else? No one told the algorithm to do that. Do you get what I'm saying, everybody? No one said, algorithm, hey, go do that. No, the algorithm does it because it's self-optimizing in order to gain maximum engagement. And what gets your maximum engagement more than anything else? Your ex-partner having a great time with someone else. So they keep showing you that picture. That's just one almost funny example, right, of algorithms moving in their own independent direction towards generating maximum profit, but maximum profit for a very small group of people. It's not like GM, right? GM, General Motors, at its height. Anybody know how many people GM employed? About 1 million people. How many people do you think Facebook employs? 18,000. Did you get that? And of those 18,000, there's 4,000 who are kind of seriously compensated. So there's this very, very narrow sector. So this is just a sense. I'm just kind of just giving you like a, just a general sense of, particular threats on the techno-feudalism side, right? On the algorithm becoming the central power in which we get upgraded algorithms and downgraded human beings. So what are people saying? So people are saying is, well, what do we need to do? We have to download human values. What are our human into the algorithms? Well, that's true. What's the problem? What are the human values? What's the universal grammar of value that data science can download into algorithms? And virtually all data scientists today, when I say virtually all, meaning virtually all of that sector of the population, is what we would call postmodern, who basically believe, Karen, like that book you were reading the other day, we were at wonderful Sharif and Gabriel's for a Sabbath dinner by Yuval Harari, right? Who basically believe that there are no genuine values, everything's constructed. So if everything's constructed, so which values should you download? And then who should decide which values to download, right? It's a big question. And of course, no one's downloading any values because no one can agree on what to download. And because no one can see in quarterly reports, right, how downloading values is going to influence those quarterly reports. Everyone's ignoring it. So the algorithms are getting stronger and stronger and stronger and stronger and stronger. AI is getting more and more powerful, both local AI and general AI, which are different kinds of AI. And we're all living our lives, right? Kind of concerned with not seeing around the corner. I just gave you one scenario of 10. We've talked about 7 or 8 others during the year, but this is just to give you the feeling of existential risk. I'm not going into the topic now. Today and next time, these are our last 2 times for this year, I'm going to actually not enter more deeply into the existential risk conversation. What I want to do is continue with the actual unfolding of snapshots of content which begin to give you a sense of what a new language of value might look like. Okay, so we've talked a little bit about the universal love story. We've talked a little bit about, right, what first values and first principles might mean. We've talked a little bit, very little bit, about unique self and visions of self. And we're going to really step into the new story much more deeply next year, starting in September. From September to next June, right, goddess willing, God willing, right, universe willing, we're going to actually do, in 12 sessions, right, a full vision of the new story, beginning to end, right, in order. This year, we're trying to kind of get the fragrance on the table. We're trying to get started. We're trying to kind of just begin, trying to get a sense of what the conversation is. And thank you all for being here. And we're here, though, not to entertain or to entrain. We're here to actually cohere, right, a group of people, a small group of people who can actually come together, participate with us at the center to actually generate this new framework of value, to generate this universal grammar of value, which is the single overriding moral imperative of our time. Change your story, change your world. If you want to change your own world, you have to change the story you're living in. If we want to change culture, we have to change the story that culture is living in, right? There's no other way to do it. So if we're living in a success story, which is rivalrous conflict governed by win-lose metrics, then we're going to generate, right, extraction models. We're going to generate exponential growth curves that violate the laws of nature, right, that are going to generate, right, a whole host of existential risks, right, in various forms. We have to change the story. And we need a shared story in order to generate global coherence. So what I want to do today is just play a little bit. The last two times, y'all have been so fantastic, the first 7 salons. So I want to just, this last salon, this one and the next one, we're not going to do one in August. August is we're all going to invest ourselves with full energy and delight, right, and eros and holy, right, engagement with the world. So we come back to September filled with energy and ready to change the world. So today, both today and next time, I want to just very gently, play with you, but play in the highest sense of the world, highest sense of the word. Just play with a set of ideas so you can kind of begin to see one way in to how we can begin to get a sense of both values and structures in the world. Now, I'm not going to actually start with values now. Next year, we're going to go through all of the first principles and first values. But today, I want to actually start with structures. I'm going to give you a structure, okay? So who's ready to play? We're going to have a good time. And it's super serious, super impact, right, and kind of how we understand the world. And I actually want to come back to the Israel conversation before I finish today to try and apply some of the distinctions we're going to articulate to Israel, which is actually an important thing to do because it's kind of on our minds. Lots of things are on our minds. It's one of them. So I'm going to try and actually apply some of the things we talk about today to Israel. So I want to set up a principle, okay, a simple principle. And from now till the end, all the easy listening's over. Everybody ready to go? We're going to dive in full on, all the way, every minute. Okay, ready? Here we go. So here's a principle which you need to map reality. And the principle is, I'm going to frame it in a particular way, but the principle is, if you have any Catholic friends, you can call it, or you're Catholic, you can call it the Holy Trinity, right? If you have a different kind of bent, you can call it, it's a name I sometimes give it, she comes in threes. She comes in threes. Meaning reality operates in threes. And you got to be able to see 1, 2, and 3, and to distinguish between them in order to actually understand pretty much anything about reality. And you can't have any values conversation about any value, about any first principle and value, about anything, about self, politics, right, about economies, right, about relationship, right, about organizational. You can't talk about anything without she comes in threes. So what does that mean? Okay, so let me start with a simple example, all right? So, what's a good example? Okay, here's a good example. So Barack Obama, before he left office, at the last correspondence dinner, he pointed out that he wasn't going to let his daughter go to Burning Man, just for the record, right? And he didn't want to let his daughter go to Burning Man because he thought, Burning Man, I'm not going to let my daughter go to that crazy place. And we're not going to debate whether he was right or wrong. But what is Burning Man, which I believe is not happening this year? So Burning Man is this self-organized community that gathers, right, on what they call the playa, right, in some state in the west of the United States. They wouldn't do it in the Northeast. And it's a quite wild event with an enormous amount of art, right? A fair amount of drugs, a fair amount of sexuality, right? A fair amount of community building, a fair amount of ecstasy, right? A fair amount of drumming, and a fair amount of a lot of other things, okay? And the people who come to Burning Man are not a kind of fringe hippie crowd. Actually, mainstream America at its leading edges comes to Burning Man, right? It's almost a requirement in Silicon Valley, right? If you want to actually get a job in Silicon Valley, right, being able to say you've gone to Burning Man is literally, right, dramatically changes your possibility. When they were trying to figure out at Google who to hire as a CEO, right, the deadlock was broken by Brin and Page because Eric Schmidt had gone to Burning Man. Literally, when they tell the story. And my colleague Jamie Wheel wrote a book called Stealing Fire about, right, and he spoke about that particular, picking of Eric, and Eric, right, came in because he went to Burning Man. So there's a culture around this Burning Man thing. Now, I've gone to Burning Man, by the way. I went to Burning Man twice to teach there. And I have to say that Burning Man was a little bit confused. Why was it confused? Now stay with me. She comes in threes. Prepersonal, personal, transpersonal. What's prepersonal? Prepersonal is before I get to personhood, right? There's no individuated person. I'm a baby, right? I'm prepersonal, right? Then, separation, individuation, Margaret Meller, 18 months, and it's 3 years, 4 years, and I begin to emerge as a little person. And I begin to engage, and I engage ethics, and I engage education, and I emerge as a person with my personal boundaries, and you can't violate my boundaries and my personal responsibilities. All very nice. So that's prepersonal would be the baby. Personal is, right, I grow up as an individual. What would transpersonal be? She comes in threes. What's transpersonal? Anybody? What's transpersonal? Anybody? What's transpersonal would mean, what would it mean? It would mean that I transcend all of the personal, but I include it. I transcend and include the personal, meaning all of the rights and responsibilities of personhood are included. And then I transcend the next level to the transpersonal. So the transpersonal might be a mystical experience, right? I might be, right, chanting, right? I might be doing a psychedelic journey. I might be ecstatically studying a sacred text, right? I might be on a vision quest, right? I might be, right, at a Hopi, right, rain dance, right? I might be on Rosh Hashanah listening, right, to the cantor chant and move into ecstasy, right? And whatever it is, right? Whatever the system is, I can go transpersonal. I mean, I can actually, right, I might be in an ecstatically embodied state, right? But there are techniques of ecstasy, as Mircea Eliade called them, which are offered by all the great traditions that allow you to move, ready, from personal to transpersonal. Now, stay close. But in order to make that move in a way that has integrity, I have to always transcend and include. This is a law of cosmos. It's called the law of development and developmental thought. There's about 100 different developmental theorists only in the last 70 years who have mapped different developmental models, but the commonality between all 100 is, there's a number of commonalities, but one of them is you have to transcend and include. Meaning when you transcend one level, you've got to include it, the best of it, and then go to the next level, okay? So prepersonal, baby. Personal, my ordinary life, responsibility, boundaries. Transpersonal, I actually access a transpersonal state of consciousness. Now, let's apply this. Let's get wider. I said we're going to play. What's another example of prepersonal? Anybody? What's another example of a prepersonal state of consciousness besides the baby? What? Right? Because prepersonal, personal, and transpersonal applies to all of us. Right? We all, right, actually experience all three of those. So what would be another example, right, of prepersonal consciousness in your life, my life, the life of an adult, right, the life of a community? What would prepersonal consciousness be? Chat box. We got a chat box here, right? So welcome anyone in the chat box. Chat box is looking pretty blank, my friends, right? Prepersonal, right? Give me some prepersonal. Give me a prepersonal example. Sleep. So when you're sleeping, right? You've actually stepped beyond, right? There's a dimension of prepersonal there. Okay. Give me one which is in a waking state, Richard, but that was a good move. Okay. Give me a waking state for a second. Anybody? What's another one? Anybody? Good morning, Vietnam. Hello, everybody. Give me a prepersonal state, right? Anybody? In the chat box, right? Intoxicated. That's a great example, right? Where actually I'm not in my personhood, right? I'm in a different state, right? So I've actually gone to, now on a good intoxication day, I can go to transpersonal, right? In other words, right? And so I can go either to prepersonal or to transpersonal. That's exactly right. So that's, and Sharif's already gotten almost to the core point we're going to get to, right? Which is this place where you can go in a state either to trans or to pre. Okay, but we're going to come back to that. Meditation. So in meditation, in good meditation, I go to transpersonal, right? A good meditation is supposed to take me to transpersonal. Okay. What's another example? What's an example of a social group that's particularly enraged? I can go, right? So rage also can take me either back to prepersonal, or the prophet, reticha deoraita. The prophet is enraged, right? The rage that moves and changes reality, right? So it could also be transpersonal, right? Does that make sense? I guess somebody turned off my oh no, that's Christina Amelon. Oh, I see, I got it. I was thinking, well, why is my picture there? That's Christina Amelon, must be using my access and got us on. Okay, a cult is exactly, right, Gabrielle, exactly, right? So a cult, for example, as a social, now we've given personal examples, as a social example, a cult is prepersonal. Why? Well, because there's one central person who's making all the decisions. Now, that doesn't per se make it prepersonal. You could have a central person who's beautiful and benevolent and, prophetic and, King David and wonderful man, right? But often, right, the leader of a cult actually violates personhood, right? So if a cult violates personhood, does everyone get that? Right? There's a violation of personhood, right? That is to say, the cult actually says you don't have autonomy, you can't choose. We're going to tell you who to marry. We're going to tell you when to have sex, right? We're going to tell you where to give your money and how much of it to give and when, right? So a cult actually can go prepersonal. It's a big deal. Now stay close. What about a spiritual community? Are spiritual communities prepersonal? Anybody? Well, depends. A spiritual community could be completely transpersonal, meaning a spiritual community could transcend and include all of the integrity of personhood and then open you up to a wider vision and community called transpersonal, right? Or a spiritual community could regress, right, to a cult-like dimension, right, and, right, violate personhood. Now, watch for a second. People are hopelessly confused between pre and trans. Do you get that? There's a pre-trans fallacy. Does everyone get that? There's a pre-trans fallacy. So it happens so often, right, that someone puts, right, that someone tells you, oh, wow, my friend, right, is in a cult. But then you look into it and you say, well, they're not in a cult. Actually, the person who told you that is locked in level 2 of personhood. They've never experienced a spiritual community. So the very notion of people getting together and dancing and praying and meditating appears to be prepersonal, but it's not. It's transpersonal. Or, right, the opposite, right? Now, you can make both moves. You can actually elevate a prepersonal experience to a transpersonal experience, right? Or you can mistake and you can think I'm in prepersonal, right? You can be in prepersonal and elevate it to transpersonal, or you can mistake transpersonal for prepersonal. Let me say it again. You can actually have a person who's in a beautiful, authentic spiritual community with great integrity, but because it looks a particular way, you mistake it and say it's prepersonal, right? Does everyone get that? So for example, there's some really great organizations that do some really great work that are listed as cults. Why? Well, because they look like, to the average American who's locked in level 2 of personhood, they look inappropriate. But you'd have to go in and check. Who are the people? Are they violating personhood or not? But you also can have people who are doing radical prepersonal stuff who are convinced that it's transpersonal. So for example, as I walked around Burning Man, which I enjoyed, right, there was lots of great stuff happening. And there was a lot of prepersonal stuff that they were actually presenting as transpersonal, but it actually wasn't. It was pure prepersonal, right? That's a big deal. So there was a confusion, right? Because when you step out of personhood, you think you must be in transpersonal. Well, you might be. And a lot of Burning Man was transpersonal, and a lot of it was prepersonal. But you actually have to be able to go into the particular context and distinguish it in your body. How do you distinguish in your body? Well, first off, it feels a particular way. I'm gonna bracket that for now. That's a bigger conversation. But a simpler way is personhood being violated? Right? Are the integrities of personhood being violated? Choice, autonomy, personal decision making, fairness, kindness, right? Right? Classical, right? The classical ethos. That's interesting, isn't it? And this was just practice. This is the least interesting thing we're going to do tonight. Just practice. I want just to practice. She comes in threes. Prepersonal, personal, transpersonal. 3. Are they all valid? Sure, in their right place and time. What's the danger? We confuse the prepersonal with the transpersonal. And we can make 2 kinds of mistakes. What I'm going to call an elevationist mistake or a reductionist mistake. What's the elevationist mistake? I elevate the prepersonal to the transpersonal. You get that, everybody? It's an elevationist mistake, right? Second mistake, reductionist mistake. I reduce the transpersonal to the prepersonal. Wow. Now, if you just got what we just did, how many people just got that? How many people just got that? Who got that? Who got that? Everybody get that? Does everyone get just really simply what? Right, Don, you got most of it. You got most of it. You're working it. You're working it there. Okay. Right now, do you get why that's valuable? You can't even begin a conversation about anything without, and there's about 10 maps like this. Right? I've actually outlined, there's 10 major ones, but I've outlined, Christina knows, 50 areas where you've got she comes in threes. Without this map can tell you more about reality than virtually anything else, and in 1,000 different nuanced ways. But otherwise, you can't make a distinction. You can't get a distinction. So I'll just give you guys an example. I'm gonna give you guys just a simple example. When I was in the Middle East in Israel, I was doing a national television show, and it was kind of the popular show for kind of secular Israel, right? For kind of, that was and it had the biggest audience of its kind. It was the highest rated show kind of of its genre, so we had a big audience. And it was very, there was a particular group, right, that was running, Kabbalah classes that were very unpopular with the people who were sponsoring my show. And so they got me on an interview, and they asked me kind of to kind of speak out because they thought I would against this group. So what I did is I called the group. I had lots of chats with like 3 or 4 of their leaders. Turned out they were great people, right? So I refused to ever, right, critique them. And not only did I not critique them, I praised them. But actually, I was able to get a sense in 3 or 4 conversations that these guys were actually real transpersonal. But the people who wanted me to critique them cited a bunch of things that they did, which they interpreted as prepersonal. Do you get that? But that was like a mistake. You have to actually talk to the people and see, is this prepersonal or is it transpersonal? Those things are very, very, very different. In my own life, right, am I going with someone to a transpersonal place? When you go to transpersonal, you got to give up some of the personal, right? You're in a new space together. You're in a shared space, right? Sexuality can go pre. Sexuality is exciting for people when it either goes down or it goes up. Do you get that? Right? Sexuality gets exciting for people when you go down, you go prepersonal. Right? That's one form of arousal. The other is you go up. Now, it's easier to go down than up, right? Different conversation. This is not a sexuality conversation, but it can either go prepersonal or it can go transpersonal. Those moves, though, are related to each other. Sometimes, for example, you can go prepersonal, stay close with me for a second, open the gate, and then go up to transpersonal. Okay, so for example, there's a major idea in mystical literature, which talks about in sexuality how you can do descent for the sake of ascent. And as you can go down, not down in a negative way, but you go to the prepersonal, you give up your ego, you open up the space in a certain kind of play, and then from there, you go to heaven, right? You go to full opening of space, right? Full expansion. But there's always this play between the prepersonal and the transpersonal. Okay, everyone got that one? Now it's gonna get more interesting. Okay, we got oh fantastic. We got to what, Sharif? 9:30 tonight? 10:30. We're finished at midnight. By midnight, no. We're gonna be done in about, we started at 5 after, so we got about 15 minutes, right everybody? Good? Something like that. Okay, give me a off on time, let me know. I think we started at 5, 6, 7 after, so we're gonna finish right on time. So here we go. Number 2. Uncertainty, certainty, uncertainty. Stay close. Okay, certainty, uncertainty, certainty. I'll say it a different way. Question, answer, question. Now, just because we're getting to know each other and I love you all, I'm giving you the unfootnoted version of this. Okay? All right? There's a lot to say about where this is from and how we got here. Bracket it for a second. Hopefully we know each other a little bit enough. Trust me on this. But I'm giving you the kind of quintessential essence of it, but it's huge. Okay, so what's certainty? Level 1 certainty. She comes in 3s. What's certainty? Anybody? Okay. Anybody's certainty? Who's got certainty? What's certainty? Anyone? Anyone got it? Certainty. What's certainty? Let's start with that. We'll start with uncertainty. We'll do it that way. Uncertainty, certainty, uncertainty. So what's uncertainty? What would uncertainty level 1 be? Anybody? Uncertainty level 1. Question. I don't know anything. I'm not sure where to go. I'm not sure how to live my life. I don't have a value structure to live in, right? I just don't know how the whole thing works, right? I'm uncertain. I might be, for example, a child. Prepersonal uncertainty, right? I'm a child, right? I'm not educated, or I'm an adult, and I've gotten through technical school and I've got a doctorate, but I don't really have a way of understanding the world. I'm filled with uncertainty. Fair? Right? Uncertainty, right? Most people are holding level 1 uncertainty, right? In other words, most of, I would say, classical liberal America, classical liberal Europe is holding massive uncertainty, so much so that this uncertainty is the value, right? In other words, anyone who claims certainty about anything is suspect. Uncertainty actually is the value. There's nothing we can be certain about, right? We are uncertain. I don't have any certainty. However, right, there's a second level where people say, no, I'm going to move beyond my uncertainty and I'm going to actually embrace a level of certainty. Okay? I'm going to begin to understand, and maybe I'll adopt a religion, all right, which has an entire set of certainties. And I'll begin to have a prism to how the world works. And I'll begin to have these vast traditions and texts and sages, and different religions are different at good things. But let's just say, the classical religions at least have an esoteric core, if not an exoteric core, an internal core of wisdom. So I actually step into a system and I begin to understand things. I understand why things happen, and I understand cause and effect, and I understand, right, some of the laws of cosmos. I begin to have certainty. And that's good and that's beautiful. So I move beyond my primary, complete uncertainty, and I step into uncertainty. That's level 2. Okay? Now, before we get to level 3, let me apply this for a second. So let's say people suffer in the world. Okay, let's say people are suffering, which people do. Okay, so at the level of uncertainty, level 1, how do I explain people suffering? I have no idea. I don't know why people suffer, right? Maybe the cosmos is random, right? Maybe it's a mystery. I have no idea, but it's all a mess to me, right? And one of the reasons I'm in uncertainty because I just have no idea why the world's so random and why so many people suffer and why the whole thing works. But when I get to certainty, I begin to, wow, now I understand. Right? And when I get to certainty, I begin to say, wow, this is how it works. And these are the rules. And this is the structure. And this is how it operates. I could even become a fundamentalist. Right? And now I've got certainty. I've got the word. I understand how it works. And that might be valid. There might be really, really important things there. And I really begin to understand cause and effect in the world. I've got this new system. But then when I go to level 3, I claim uncertainty again. And at level 3, oh my God, I've got no idea. The whole thing's a mystery. So for example, we're going to stay really close with me now. It gets very, very subtle, and you can't get this with your mind. You have to get this is mystical realization. You got to get it on the inside. It's very beautiful, but it's very subtle. So for example, let's take a Jewish example just for the sake of it. And who's heard of Abraham? Right, Abraham, we know Abraham, right? First patriarch, nice guy, okay? Beautiful man, holy man. So Abraham is talking to God in the book of Genesis, and God says, Sodom and Amorah, 2 particular cities, are not good folks. I'm going to destroy them. So what should Abraham say? What should he say? He should say, well, of course, you're God. Right? In other words, he's not talking to Gafni. He's not talking to the Rebbe of Chabad, right? He's talking to God, right? He's talking about the source of all wisdom, right? The source of all knowledge, the God's eye view. God just told him in this text, I'm going to destroy this city. So what should Abraham do? And say, well, yes, sir, right? Faith. What does Abraham do? It's an amazing text. Abraham says, really? No way, dude. Hashofet chol haaretz lo yaseh mishpat? Will the judge of all reality not incarnate justice? And Abram begins an argument with divinity. It's a shocking text, right? He's speaking to the source of all wisdom, who gives them an absolute imperative, and Abram says, no, I can't go for this certainty. And Abram challenges divinity. And if you read the text carefully, I don't have time to unpack it fully now, but you actually understand that the election of Abraham and the beginning of the covenant is because he embraces level 3 uncertainty. He refuses level 2 certainty. He refuses to stop there. He says, I'm actually going to challenge, just give you another example. Beginning of the book of Exodus, a gentleman named Moses. God gives him a mission. Free the people. Moses fulfills the mission. The people get an extra quota of bricks when they're slaves, right? What is Moses? And this is exactly what God told Moses would happen. Moses turns to God and he doesn't say, wow, it's happening exactly the way you thought, right? Moses turns to God and says, this is not okay, right? I cannot accept this certainty. Lama hareota la'am hazeh. How do you dare, God, right? Deal like this with these people, right? I can't accept this. And Moses challenges the divine. Wow, that's shocking. So both Moses and Abraham incarnate level 2 certainty. They're paragons, right, of mystical realization, yet they refuse to stay at level 2 certainty, which we're going to call here fundamentalism, and they move to level 3, which is uncertainty. But now stay close. But they transcend and include their level 2 certainty. They're not going back to level 1 uncertainty. Did you get that? They're not going back to everything goes and anything goes. They're not going back to there's no law. They're not going back to it's a tale told by an idiot full of sounds and furies signifying nothing. They're not going back to materialism. They're saying, wow, we moved from level 1 uncertainty to level 2 certainty, and now we're going to move to level 3. And level 3 is when I'm so deep on the inside, I'm filled with realization. I have absolute trust in the cosmos, and I refuse to settle for level 2 certainty, and I embrace with radical love level 3 uncertainty. But it's not uncertainty which is level 1. So for example, when Yuval Harari writes, right, in Homo sapiens or Homo Deus, he's at level 1 uncertainty. He accuses religion of being stuck, and that's why he writes his book, Brother Sharif, exactly the way he does. He accuses religion of being stuck at level 2 certainty. He caricatures religion, as does right? Leonard Mlodinow at Caltech, and as does Sam Harris, and as does Richard Dawkins, right? And as does Chris Hitchens, right? All the people have basically effectively challenged religion in the public square with great impact. They caricature religion as being stuck at level 2. And they're often right. But that's not actually where religion is operating from in its highest level. At its highest level, religion moves to level 3. And level 3 transcends and includes level 2. So you might think this was a meta-theoretical thing we just did. But if you actually just got what we just did, we could actually change the entire relationship to spirit in the entire world. Because the reason spirit is rejected is because spirit generally stops at level 2. Right? Spirit says, okay, we've grasped a set of certainties, and we're uncertainty level 1, certainty level 2. Right? That's how it's understood. It's a mistake. There's a level 3. The level 3 is uncertainty. But that uncertainty of level 3 is not the same as the certainty of level 1. So for example, one master, my teacher's teacher, my teacher died about 150 years ago, and he had a teacher, and his teacher was named Menachem Mendel of Kotsk, the master of Kotsk. So my teacher's teacher tells a story. And here's the story. He says, what's the difference between a baby and an old wise sage? A baby says, who? What? Where? How? When? Right? The baby's asking the most fundamental questions. And what does the great master say? Who? What? Where? How? When? The Kutzker says, was tut sich? What's the difference? And he answers, Gewalt. Gewalt, everything is the difference. Did you get that? Wow. Right? So the baby's, right? Baby's at level 1. Uncertainty, I don't know anything. And then you answer the question, you fill it with certainties and more and more and more and more. And then finally you get to the sage. And the sage says, I don't know. The sage embraces mystery, but the sage is not level 1, right? It's not a regressive uncertainty. It's not ignorance. It's the highest knowing, which is the knowing that I do not know. But it's not level 1. Meaning I've embraced all of my knowings and I've transcended and included them. Remember our principle, right? To move from one level to the next, the law of development is you transcend and include. So I transcend and include all of my certainty. And from the place of all of that certainty, from there I embrace the mystery. Now, if that's the place that spirit stood, then spirit could actually share all of the certainties and embrace the mystery and become an incredibly potent force in the world. The primary reason why spirit is not a force in the world today is because spirit arrests its development at level 2 certainties, which is a disaster. Which is a disaster. Not because level 2 certainties are wrong, because they're limited. Right? They're often right. They have an enormous amount to say, which is wildly important, which is critical. But at the highest level, I embrace uncertainty again, but an uncertainty that includes, right, the certainty. Wow. So that's 2. Now I know what we're doing now. This is deep stuff. This is deep stuff. And we've gotten through, I wanted to do 8 of these with you today. And of course I'm at number 2, which tells you something. Okay? Right? But you begin to get a sense. These are the 2 least interesting of them. Okay, what we're going to do next time is we're going to do the last 6 or 7. Now that you've got the frame, right, we're going to step in, and you'll see that just this simple principle of she comes in 3s and being able to distinguish between level 1 and level 3. Am I at prepersonal or am I at transpersonal? Right? Am I at level 1 uncertainty or level 3 uncertainty? The difference is everything. Everything. Now we're going to apply this again. We're going to apply this to love. We're going to apply this to tragedy. We're going to apply this to business. We're going to apply this to across the board, to freedom. And the fundamental confusion in the conversation is the inability to distinguish between those. Now, I said, and it's 8:05, so I guess I have to stop. So what we'll do is I want to end on time to honor the integrity of our love and relationship. But what we'll do is we'll apply this next time. That's a commitment. We'll apply it to the political situation, both in America, in Israel, in Europe. We'll actually look at where Europe is, right? Where U.S.-China relations are, right? Where, right, the Israel, right, Arab nexus is, and after we've laid out 5, 6 more of these, we'll begin to see that you can't even begin to have a conversation, right? I'll just give you, like, we're now at 8:05. Okay, so we've got 2 minutes till 8:07. I'll just give you the hint of an example, just of one, just so you get a fragrance of it, okay? So where did personhood enter into public consciousness? Right, personhood's very strong in biblical thought, right? For example, based on homo imago Dei, that the human being is created in the divine image. But where did personhood, meaning the intrinsic dignity of personhood, where did it enter into Western thought? Right, the beginnings of it are in Greece, but it's really in the Renaissance. And the Renaissance is the beginning, and then it climaxes in the Western Enlightenment and universal human rights. Okay, that's the personal. When we say the personal, don't violate my boundaries, don't violate my rights. The personal, personhood, that's emergent, right, as a center of gravity in culture in the Renaissance, and it apothesizes itself, it crystallizes in the Western Enlightenment. Now stay close for a second, stay close. So you have a conflict between Israel and Hamas, okay? Now, Israel, like the United States, like France, like England, got a lot of issues. Israel's an imperfect country. That's a given, of course. But Israel, stay close for a second, assumes the value of personhood. Because Israel is based on, right, as a secular democratic state and as a Jewish state, but as both. But let's take now the law of the secular democratic state, right? It's based on personhood, meaning it embraced the values of the Western Enlightenment. Does that make sense to everyone? Individual dignity. So for example, you go to Hadassah Hospital, which was nominated for a Nobel Prize, and you see Jewish doctors and Arab doctors working next to each other. Whoever comes in is treated, right? And there's a reason it was nominated for a Nobel Prize, because it's a gorgeous, right, poem to the utter dignity of personhood. It's a big deal. So now, Israel also has a dimension that's transpersonal, right? But at its core, the core of Israel is the personal. It's a big deal. Hamas is a complete different structure. Hamas is by definition prepersonal. Hamas rejects every single value of the Western Enlightenment in principle. Right? The Western Enlightenment didn't happen for Hamas. There are no universal human rights. They don't exist. There's no common ground. Right? The notion of individuated human dignity as a universal category doesn't exist in the code structure of Hamas. Not about individual people, it's a code structure. Right? One embraces the personal. The other is, in its essential structure, prepersonal. It's pre-Renaissance human rights. So for example, in a prepersonal structure, in order to accomplish your political goals, which are to, right, impose Islamic law, right, on the largest amount of territory you can, right, if you force civilians to remain in hospitals or force civilians to remain in schools and then shoot rockets at a democracy, then cause them to be bombed, not allowing the people to leave, and you hide your munitions dumps, right, and your arms in the schools and in the hospitals, right, in order to generate casualties, in order to accomplish your political goals, that's not a problem because you're prepersonal. It's structurally not a problem. In your value system, that's perfectly fine. But if you've actually attained the structure value of personhood, then if you go to attack, right, in order to defend yourself, you'll drop leaflets. You'll phone. Israel in 2014, right, made 20,000 phone calls into Gaza. Never happened in the history of any army, where you phone your ostensible enemy and ask everybody to leave to clear out. Literally never happened in the world. 20,000 phone calls were made to cell phones, right? Because Israel values personhood. Now, if you value personhood, that doesn't mean that you don't have to sometimes bomb, right? Just like Allied armies bombed Germany at the end of World War II. Right? That's the tragedy of war, right? But your core value affirms personhood. So I'll just give you, just till you get the difference, I'll give you the last sentence. We'll finish with this. Let's say that Israel, right, laid down all of its arms. Israel decided, you know what, we're going to demilitarize, right? I mean, we've listened, and we've listened carefully, and we've listened to, the various lobbies, and we've thought this through. We're going to demilitarize. What would happen the next day? Genocide, right? Hamas, right, took over. Israel laid down its arms. You'd have genocide. Let's say Hamas laid down its arms and said, we're going to lay down arms, right, total peacefully. What would Hamas complete demilitarized and laid down its arms? What would happen the next day? Peace, right? Peace. That's an enormous distinction, right? It's actually shocking. If Israel laid down its arms, next day you'd have genocide. If Hamas laid down its arms, next day you'd have peace. Whoa! Like that's a little bit, it's kind of shocking when you realize it. But it's structural. Israel embraces personhood. Period. Hamas is prepersonal by definition. Right? It's definitionally prepersonal. And Hamas's experiences of mysticism, which are real, and here's the big deal, they're real, just like Osama bin Laden's experiences of mysticism were real. But they're mediated through a prepersonal prism. Does everyone get that? In other words, it's not that they're not having mystical experiences, not that the devil never looks like the devil has fangs. They're having genuine mystical experiences. If you look into Osama bin Laden's eyes, man, he would have done great at Burning Man. The guy would have blown it away, man. His blazing eyes, great beard. Probably taught at Salon, right? Great. He was doing serious mysticism for sure. But that mysticism is mediated through a structure of consciousness. And that structure of consciousness is prepersonal. Wow. Wow. That changes the entire conversation. Right? Without that, you can't explain what's going on. You have someone like John Oliver, who gave probably, with total respect to John, I don't think I've ever heard a larger piece of public idiocy, right? Where he kind of went through like the issues with Israel, completely ignoring. He was assuming everyone's got the same structure of consciousness. They all believe in the same things. And children are dying. And how could it be that children are dying? It's a tragedy when children die. It was a tragedy when the Allies bombed Germany and children died. Right? But that's not what's happening here. And what's happening here is, right, and I'm using Israel as an example. You can't have a discussion about anything, right, unless you actually get structures of consciousness, and unless you get that a mystical experience is mediated through a structure of consciousness. If the structure of consciousness through which the mystical experience is mediated is prepersonal, it's going to look a particular way. If the structure of consciousness through which the mystical experience is mediated is personal, it's going to look a completely different way. It'll go transpersonal, right? It'll transcend and include the personal. Without these structures, you can't begin a conversation about pretty much anything, right? Now, again, just to be clear, this doesn't come from a right-wing Israel position. I lived in Israel in a house with an Arab family, super close friends, right? And as I lived this story, right? So this is not a left or a right-wing position. This is just about how you actually understand facts in front of you, right? That was just a modicum, just a fragrance of how you can apply this for a second. So let's hold here. I apologize. I went, 8:07, 5 minutes longer than I should have. So thank you guys for the grace of those extra 5 minutes. And I know we're 5 minutes late, but anyone would like any questions, and feel free to comment to any way you'd like, please, in our last couple of minutes. So unmute yourself if you have a question, a comment, right? A joke, a question about, your early attachment style, anything.
I've got a question.
Richard.
How are you? Very good class tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, man.
Fine. So I think all of us on the call, right? It's very intellectual. the stuff you said. It's somewhat complex. How do you wake more people up? We all resonate with it. We get it. We all want it to happen and are here with you. We want to make the story, but how do you wake more people up to even be awakened from prepersonal to know that they can move upwards?
It's great, Richard. That's a great question. And so you want to give me like a serious 2 minutes together here? Like I'm going to take it. I could give you a quick glib answer, but I'm going to give you a super serious one because you're self-evidently, we haven't met, you're self-evidently super serious, right? So let me give you the super serious one, and we'll have a couple of chaims, and hopefully we'll get to transpersonal as well. Okay? So it's like this. My natural predilection, right, is to be in a room with 25,000 people or on a beach with 25,000 people, and to speak in kind of clear, right, easy structures that can actually, find the interior space and move people, right? That's my general. I don't like to write, right? I prefer large rooms of people. However, and here's the however, and I actually I had a long talk with our neighbor to the north, Tony Robbins. I had a long talk with Tony at his house about this a couple of years back, right? Where Tony basically, right, he creates this huge change state in a room, right? Which is the kind of thing I love to do at festivals in Israel. You change people's state, right? They have access to an experience, but then the state recedes, right? Then the state changes back. And unless you can actually give people, not only people, but the very core of culture itself, a new source code, a new story, then you actually won't change the core structures. We have to actually evolve the source code. Now, to evolve the source code, we have to do it in 2 steps. Step 1 is to actually develop the actual distinctions themselves so that they are, let me see, they're uncontestable, right? They're so strong that they can actually go through any university department, they can go through any place, anywhere, right? But we've got to actually think anew. We have to think in a way we haven't thought before. Then that's step 1. Then step 2 is we have to do what I call the truck driver version, right? Meaning, what's the most elegant, but it's not a first simplicity, it's a second simplicity, right? This is another one of the 3s. First simplicity, complexity, second simplicity. So first we got to work it out, which is a big job. Then we got to get it down. We call that the Great Library. And then we've got to actually disseminate it in a way that it changes the source code structures. And my feeling is, and I thought about this long and hard for 10 years, 24 hours a day, that actually there's great work going out there, and it should all happen. It's fantastic, fantastic people. But it's on the desktop, right? It speaks within certain silos. It expands a little bit beyond a silo. It goes viral for a day, right? But it's lots of noise. The ratio of signal to noise is insane, as you know, right? If we can change the source code, that's what Da Vinci did. When Da Vinci faces the Black Death, right, and he faces all of the structural problems of pre-modernity, what he realizes is it's only a source code move that's going to change it. And the source code move he made is to tell the story of modernity, which changed everything. Everything changed, right, because of the story of modernity. So we're now in the middle of post-modernity. If we don't actually tell a new story that works all the way up and all the way down across the board, we're gonna actually rearrange, right, chairs on the deck of the Titanic. Now, that doesn't mean you can't catch a good concert. It doesn't mean you can't change lives, right? You can change lives and do beautiful things, which are not about changing the source code. And I'll just give you an example, right? I mean, Make-A-Wish, that, Sharif's, I know is very involved in, is a gorgeous example of something. Its job isn't to change the source code. Its job is to help kids. And that's what it should do, and it's gorgeous. So that's not a source code move. That's let me help people who are suffering right now. That's gorgeous. Right, and there's a lot of that we can do. There's a lot of Make-A-Wish kind of work we can do that's hugely valuable.
Very big source code movement now. It's called the vaccine.
Well, that's a big conversation.
And I'm not sure if I'm joking.
Yeah, no, I'm not sure you're joking either. Right. In other words, what you said was actually very subtle, and I got exactly what you said, and I got all the implications, and I got everything you're reading, and I got the whole thing. That's correct, and that's the shadow. The shadow side of changing the source code, right, is to try and structurally change, right, the source code, right, in a way that's insidious, right? And there are definitely voices with quite a bit of information, right, that interpret what's going on in light of that prism, right? That's obviously a bigger conversation we can have, but we both understood what the conversation was, right? And so we'll bracket that. But this is great, and let's sit and talk about this more. Okay, thank you. Thank you. Right, great question. Anybody else?
Hello, Rabbi. It's Ken. Can you hear me?
Yeah, how you doing, Cousin Kenny?
Good, Rabbi. Very good.
It's great to see you.
Don't people
Or
inherently...
to hear you.
Can you hear me?
I can. I said it's great to see you, but I'm realizing it's great to hear you. Now I see you. There you are. Okay.
Okay. Don't people crave inherently certainty?
People crave certainty, and people also dance in love and uncertainty, right? In other words, in every relationship, you need a core certainty, but you also need, right, a kind of beautiful uncertainty. Right? It means we can hold each other even in the uncertainty. So what we need is an intrinsic experience of certainty that allows us to then hold the uncertainty. When we don't have an intrinsic experience of certainty, then we replace the lack of intrinsic certainty. I am true. Our love is true. We replace it with false certainties. When we have an intrinsic sense of certainty, then we can hold a much wider field of uncertainty. So for example, a baby. The most important thing you can give a baby is the intrinsic experience that I am true, that I am good, right? That I am held. From that place, the baby can hold an enormous amount of uncertainty, right? So for example, I'll just give you a wild example, Cousin Kenny. Give you a wild example. Virtually all the people in the United States who perpetrated school shootings, and we've had school shootings once every 20 days until the pandemic. I mean, literally we got used to insanity. School shootings became literally part of the topography of America, but virtually everyone who perpetrated, right, a school shooting, right, came from a place of radical uncertainty about who I am, right? Not held, fatherless, right? Bereft of any sense of interior identity, right? And so what those people did is they went for the most brutal certainty of power. Wow. Right? So the experience of, and if I don't get it as a baby, I can get it later in other ways. But I've got to have an intrinsic experience, right? So for example, let's give the last example. So actually you and I, Cousin Kenny, have sat around with Christina and Zion, Sharif and Gabrielle's, beautiful Friday night table. And when we're together there, we have this experience of certainty, right? But it's not dogmatic certainty. It's the certainty that there's an order to the universe, that there's intrinsic goodness, that there's intrinsic value. And from there we can laugh and we can dance and we can sing, right? And everything we look upon is blessed. Right? But it's not dogmatic. It's not prepersonal certainty. It's not level one, right? It's the certainty which is level 2. From that place, we can hold together the uncertainty and move into the future. Does that make any sense, brother?
It does, but I'm going to give you, it was kind of an amazing interview that I heard. Pat Riley, probably arguably one of the most successful sports coaches, general managers, was interviewed. And he said, life is difficult. And he quoted from M. Scott Peck's book, The Road Less Traveled. Basically, what he was saying was, you don't expect to hear this from a basketball coach, is the certainty that he lives by is that life is difficult. And if you accept that, then it's easier to deal with life. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but yes, and I'm sure that Pat Riley, underneath life is difficult, has an even deeper certainty, which is some code of ethos. Some code of life is meaningful. So for example, if you just said life is difficult, but you didn't say life was meaningful, you'd have no place to go. So Buddha,
and he did, but
right.
I guess what I'm saying, it seemed like he had kind of a hierarchy of thought.
Yeah.
That's what which is unique to hear a basketball coach have kind of a source code.
Yeah.
Because that was his source code, basically. Right. Life is difficult. And also he said, it's not what happens, it's how you react to what happens.
Now we're beginning to get into value and meaning.
Right.
But imagine, Cousin Kenny, because remember, all our issues are global. So we need a universal grammar of value that's non-dogmatic. It's not level 2 certainty. It can embrace level 3 certainty, right? But it's actually a shared language of value.
But doesn't Buddhism basically say life is suffering, right?
That's the first of 4 noble truths.
Okay, but so in a sense, that's what Riley was saying, in a secular kind of way.
Right, but and Buddhism's next step is that there's intrinsic meaning in the field, right?
Right. So do the Buddhists reach the level of spirit that you're talking about, that they transcend and they get to that third level?
That's every great system has its own unique contribution, and Buddhism definitely has a particular contribution that's wildly important. When I was in Dharamsala, hanging out with the Dalai Lama, he invited me to come hang with him, so we spent a day together there, and we chatted, in his bedroom, right? I got a sense of the particular unique gifts, right, that Tibet has. We called it a dialogue between Tibet and Jerusalem, and of course, right, Hebrew wisdom has another set of gifts, and they're different. But they're different. They're different gifts in different fields.
But don't each one transcend that level 2 that you're talking about and get to level 3?
Each great tradition has the capacity, right, to actually transcend level 2 and get to level 3. But often, the public structures of a religion often get stuck in level 2, right? The Dalai Lama gets quite viciously attacked by his own institutions because he's moved to level 3. But that's also why he's had such impact on the West. Yeah, beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you for a wonderful lecture tonight.
Kenny. Great to see you.
Take care. Good seeing
you. Thank you. Do we have a last person? Do we have any of the goddesses? Any of the feminine voices? We've heard from some gorgeous men. Any wonderful women? Right? Nina's looking at her notes there. Okay, Dr. Kincaid. Okay, Donnie. Donnie, welcome. And Dawn.
Mark, it's all in the chat.
It's all in the chat. I missed it all. It's all in the chat. Okay.
All the goddesses have been running around in the chat box.
The goddesses are wise. Okay. Beautiful. They're on the, yes. 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 Amen. Amen. Awesome. Right. That's there. Dawn and Donnie and, right. Okay. Yay. Beautiful. Thank you, everyone. So let's hold here. Right. Thank you. What a delight to be with you. Okay. Look forward.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, everyone. This was beautiful. This was very enlightening. And I've heard this before, and every time I hear it, it just gets me deeper and deeper and deeper. So thank you for that spiraling into the core. And we'll see you all next month.
Next month's our final one of this year.
Yeah.
Okay. We got a big next month. We're going to pick up from right here. Gorgeous.
Hi, Richard.
Hey, guys.
I'm going to have a glass of wine on you.
Cheers.
All right.
Transpersonal coming up.
Good night, guys.
Good night, everybody. Thank you.
Bye.